Hello, everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, Pat and I are going to be talking about selling airsoft gear. And as many, I would say probably most of our listeners are aware, there's a tremendous market for residual, secondhand airsoft gear, whether it's AEGs, GBBs, tactical gear, like you name it. And in fact, as I think about sort of my time playing airsoft, almost all of the gear that I've used for airsoft, including my airsoft guns, have been bought from another player rather than from a store. There's a lot of good reasons for that, not least of which is sort of the gray area that we've had for airsoft in Canada for years, which we'll get into. But there are also some tips and tricks we want to share that can help you make sure that you not only get fair value for your stuff or that you pay fair value if you're buying, but also how to make your selling more effective and, actually make sure you offload the thing that you're trying to offload. So I thought we'd dive in first off by saying, why is there such a residual market for airsoft? If you look at it as a hobby, not all hobbies are created equal when it comes to selling off airsoft gear. And I know that for Pat and for myself, being able to sell a piece of kit has factored into the budgetary calculation of being able to buy, the next piece of kit. And as I said at the start, for my time playing airsoft, the vast majority of everything that I've worn or used or whatever, of course, with the exception of BBs and batteries and stuff, have been bought from somebody else rather than from a store. Now, we haven't had a store in St. John's either. It's been hard for us to, aside from Frontline for the last several years, you couldn't really walk into anywhere and just buy stuff off a shelf. That's not a reality that existed for us. So we had to find other ways to buy stuff. And typically that was from, buying secondhand from people. And that was certainly the case back in 2006 when I started playing, right?
And in 2007 when I did. The majority of airsoft guns I've owned have also been secondhand and mostly purchased, sight unseen. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. That looks cool in the picture. Send it to me. I have bought 3 pistols new, but that's largely because of previous frustrations about buying them secondhand and then having to try to source parts for them.
That's
that
true.
Aren't really as much of an issue for an airsofter now as they were in 2008 when I just didn't have as many contacts for purchasing parts. I didn't know as much about what I was looking for, and so sourcing bits was very difficult. Whereas now it's much easier. I just also have seen the price of Marui pistols come down so much in Canada that I'm I'll just buy the ones I want. I don't really need a bit of discount that you get secondhand buying gas pistols. Mm-hmm.
If it is indeed a discount, because some of the upgraded gas pistols secondhand are really stupid expensive. But that's a conversation for later on in the episode.
I mean, totally. Sure. You're still getting a discount. It's just a different kind of discount.
But there's this reality with airsoft that for the majority of airsofters, and I'm not going to say all, but the vast majority of us really take good care of our gear, right? Yeah, nobody likes their toys being broken. I mean, bottom line. But as well, I think when you think about how the average player plays, we're not making risky plays. We're not, dragging our stuff along the ground or, diving into cover in a way that's going to break our stuff. And in fact, if you just look at players on the field, most of them don't end up going prone in any, real meaningful way, which the act of going prone is certainly something that could damage your gear. And lots of players don't do that, right? So as a consequence of that, I think you tend to see airsoft gear and guns in particular tend to be babied a little bit more. Plus, they're just really cool, right? So you don't want to break them.
Yeah, I mean, if you have, a real steel rifle and you need to take a sliding dive into some cover more or less on your face, the rifle will still work after. An airsoft gun might, depending on how you, stick the landing or not. And I think people are aware that, these are much more fragile than the real thing. So they're a lot more careful about doing stuff that could beat them up, especially because most of us are paying for our own gear. So we're really acutely aware of how much some of it costs.
That's true. Yeah.
You know, it's also one of those things where, you know, like there are ways to, as a couple of our older videos demonstrate, there are ways to take a sliding dive into cover that don't risk your gun, as long as you don't mind having no skin on parts of you. But like, practically speaking, yeah, they're expensive toys and people think they're really cool. And so I think even the most like aggressive airsofters in terms of how they play have a vibe of, well, I don't want to do anything that's going to break this.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
And I'm sure there are exceptions. I mean, I've seen a few people who are exceptions. But if you're looking at secondhand airsoft gear, I think broadly, in terms of like, oh, you know, it's been smacked off the ground and that's why it no longer works, you're probably not at that higher risk.
Yeah. And especially when you look at like you get away from the airsoft guns and you look at your tactical gear, like your load bearing equipment or what have you, like, especially if you're buying good quality gear, like some people decide to wear like real steel, like plate carriers or real steel, like BDUs, like, you know, 511 tactical or like some of us wear, etc., like Cry Precision even. That gear tends to be extremely well made, extremely rugged, and barring some sort of trauma where you know, slip and fall into a piece of rebar that rips the pants open or whatever, in which case I would say you probably have bigger problems. But during the average skirmish, like, you're not going to wear and tear that gear down as much. And I mean, if you look at just going back to 2007, when I bought my first Cyraz, this was a Phantom Cyraz, so it was technically a reproduction, but it was a very good quality reproduction.
They're almost certainly factory seconds, like
definitely. There's no question.
thirds.
Like a factory second Eagle or whatever. And like, I bought that from someone who had already used it for many years, and it was in perfect shape when I bought it. And I used that plate carrier, or that Cyraz, I should say, for, conservatively, at least another 4 years on top of that before I switched to a 1694. And when I sold it, I got almost the same price that I paid for it.
And
right? Like
fairness,
at the time I paid like $250, which is a lot. But like I probably sold it for like $175 or something. So when you look at amortized over the lifetime that I used that's not very expensive, right?
And, you know, the funny part there is like, you know, my Cyraz, same deal. You know, I think I sold it for $2, paid $250, you know, and, you know, I mean, like I said before on our podcast, I know who has it. I know where it is. I know what condition it's in. And realistically, I'm not convinced that if the guy who has it now tied it to the back of his car and dragged it to play next time, it wouldn't still be in pretty okay shape. Like,
yeah,
it's a very durable piece of kit. And I mean, part of that is, you know, the tactical gear that we're looking at is generally made of Cordura, which is quite durable, right? It's designed to take a beating. And, you know, if you're wearing, as I do, a real steel piece of kit, like, it's designed to take a beating, you know, 24/7 for extended periods by soldiers on deployment who are not really, let's face it, known for being kind to their equipment. Mm-hmm. Subsequently, you should basically never wear out a vest for airsoft.
Yeah, I mean, if it's good quality, absolutely, right?
You know, if it's even decent quality, right? Like if you're buying, you know, like the $80 cross-draw tactical vest, even that is half hard to wear out at airsoft if you're actually being at all kind to it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really good thing.
And that really leads into the overall point of this episode, which is that as you start going through gear, you have an opportunity to offload that gear to somebody else, right?
And without feeling in any way, I think, uncool about it. Like, you know, my Cyraz and also my 1694 both went to players who were super happy, and I don't know if the guy who bought the 1694 is happy with it now because he lives away and I haven't spoken to him since I sold it to him. But like, you know, they were in great condition. There are always people who want to try different styles of kit, different approaches, including us, right? You know, there is a very understandable, believable world where I buy a different kind of holster just to try it, you know, where I buy different kind of knee pads elbow pads, whatever, just to try, oh yeah, this is a new piece of kit, I want to see how it works. I want to see if it's adequate. And hey, there's also a secondary market. So if I spend $100 and I hate it, I can probably get $80 for it.
Yeah, or conversely, you can approach a secondary market looking for that piece of kit so that you don't break the bank on a piece of kit that you're just trying out to see if it's going to work. And I mean, like I would say the same thing. Like I have my old JPC, which I haven't worn since I switched to the chest rig. It's still in fine condition. And if I ever did decide to sell it, which I mean, I'm still sort of like emotionally attached to it. My wallet may feel differently, but I'm emotionally attached to it. And if I were to sell it to somebody,
it's his emotional support plate carrier.
Yeah, it looks cool. Let's be honest. It feels cool to put it on, etc. But my point is, if I were to sell it to somebody, like aside from the fact that I've sweat in it, it's still in essentially perfect condition. Right. So I'm not selling this to someone going like, oh, yeah, well, it's a crappy piece of kit, but I'll offload it to you. It's like, no, it's a great piece of kit. It still does everything it's supposed to. It is not going to fail you, just like it didn't fail me. And as a consequence of that, like if I paid $100 for it, I don't need to give it to you for 20. Like I can ask you for a fair price. We can talk about the fair price a little bit later. But to your point just now, Pat, like you don't feel bad offloading your secondhand stuff because it's not like it's going to a thrift store or something like that. Like it's still in perfectly decent shape and it can serve somebody else the same way that it served you in the majority of cases. Yeah, there are pieces that you're like, I don't like this or what have you. But
and one of the added cool things for us, and this is definitely a perk of having a team, but I think also of having like a broader community that's relatively close knit. Hey, we live on a small island. Is that a large chunk of my teammates have swapped gear with me, right? Like so the tactical belt that I'm using, I got from Karoo. He got a new one that he likes better. It was much cheaper to buy his old really good one than to buy a brand new really good one. So I did. And like, part of the benefit there is that your teammates will often give you, more of a discount than perhaps is sensible. Thank you, Cal. But, it works out, over time both ways, right? Like I don't charge my teammates for tech work. So maybe I'm the one who's losing on that exchange, financially speaking. But at the end of the day, we can exchange gear. I can try on gear. People can try on my gear. The latter happens more often because I've been doing this for a long while and I have more stuff, but the secondary market allows you to, even within a community, exchange goods that you don't necessarily want for other stuff. And and to address, Phil's earlier point of like, well, why does Airsoft have a good secondary market? I think that the answer is that a lot of this stuff does hold value to exchange, right? You can buy a Cyraz, wear it to every Airsoft game you play for 8 years, and have no noticeable wear and tear on it. So yeah, it's still a good item. It's still got value and people are willing to pay a reasonable price for it. Yeah. Ideal, right? As opposed to like, the sort of used car market where like you buy a new car and then you literally drive it off the lot and like $10,000 falls off it.
Yeah.
Right.
And that helps sort of keep your expenses in check too. Like what the guys were on the Discord were talking a little while ago. They're saying like, how much money have you spent on Airsoft? And like, if I tally how much money I've spent on Airsoft over the last, 16 years, that's straight up is looking at like 5 figures. Right. But that's not how much money I've invested because I've sold a lot of stuff too, right? So like I said, like I spent $250 buying a Cyraz, but then I sold it for $175. So really, that Cyraz only cost me $75, right? So like ultimately, like when you're looking at your investment into Airsoft, and if you're a guy like Jordan who's buying all kinds of kit or whatever, when you buy kit, it's certainly expensive, but you can also think about starting to offload it. And if you're listening to this and you've accumulated all this kit and you really haven't considered, oh well, I don't know if I should sell stuff if you're attached to it or what have you, but it absolutely, there's a lot of value that you can reclaim from your stuff if you're no longer using it, right? As long as, of course, you're not trying to scam people, etc. But that's a whole different conversation to be had, right?
Totally. Just looking at my current situation, so I've cheated a bit on the buying and selling of my Airsoft gear over the years in the sense that I'm a gun tech. So I have paid for most of my post-initial investment Airsoft gear with money made fixing other people's stuff, which is not a bad way to do it if you're interested in trying it out. Not gonna lie. But I'm also at a point where, so at the moment I have two M4s that I got from teammates, not working super well. That one is finished, one I have a parts order on the way that I'm going to be selling, and I'm going to be selling them because I don't need 4 M4s. Like beyond just like, oh yeah, it's cool to have on the wall, but it's also cool to have like money in my pocket to spend on other airsoft stuff realistically. So how am I going to go about selling those? Well, I'm going to post them up locally. We have a Discord for Airsoft locally where there's, a little buy and sell channel and all. I mean, get Phil to take some glamour shots of them because knowing a good photographer is really helpful when you're trying to sell any sort of kit. He could probably do a whole podcast on like the mechanics of taking good photos of your airsoft stuff. And maybe at some point we'll get like him and the other photographer on our team to like do a airsoft photography podcast. That actually might be a cool idea.
Yeah.
But, for the topic at hand. So, I'm doing my best to make sure that those have like nice accessories on them that make them look as good as I can out of my like not insubstantial pile of external parts that I don't need. They're both painted because almost all of our guns are. Lots of people like the sort of tactical, camo paint jobs. Props to Cal and a couple other guys on our team for showing me how to do a nice one. So those look pretty good. Internally, if you're selling a gun, you want to make sure it's right and tight. Yeah. So in one case, it has pretty much our standard package of upgrades that we put into all of our guns. I just finished rebuilding it. It is working muy bueno. I'm really happy with it. The other one, I am thinking it might be easier to sell locally if I don't put upgraded parts in it. So it was a GNP gun originally. I have a GNP pre-built gearbox coming. I'm going to put that in, test it, and see what I think about it. Knowing me, I'm then probably going to take it out and put some more parts in it and then sell it. But we'll see how that works out. But yeah, I mean, obviously, especially where I am a gun tech, making sure everything is working right and tight is really important. That being said, when I sell them, I'm also going to put, if I'm selling them to people who aren't local, I'm going to be shipping them. So there's going to be a note on the sale that is like, this is final sale. I'm not dealing with it being broken. Like I will take a video of it for you and send it to you as I put the tape on it. That to show you that it works perfectly well before I ship it to you. But like once I put it in the hands of the postal service, I will pack it as well as I can, and like don't cheap out if you're selling someone a $400 or $500 or $800 airsoft gun. Buy some foam, put some foam in the box, package it up so it doesn't get beaten up on the way, but most postal services, I think, have a sort of, hard knock love approach to shipping large boxes of stuff. And it doesn't really matter if you put fragile on it or not. And so this is a really, it is going to sound perhaps obvious, but insure the package for what you're selling it at, right? So if I sell a gun for $800, I'm going to pay the extra $6 or $8 or $10 on the shipping out of my own pocket if I have to make sure that it has that much insurance on it for when it goes away. Because that way, if it goes to them and Canada Post has broken the gun in half or something, then I don't have a situation where I'm left on the hook for $800 and don't have a gun. Right? So if you're selling, protect yourself, but also that's protecting the person you're selling it to, because if it gets to them and it's broken, you can go, okay, we're going to get money from Canada Post and I'll give it to you. Might take a couple of months, but at least there's a resolution.
Yeah, and I don't want to backtrack just really quickly because, like you mentioned, like selling local, that's certainly an option. Like if you're looking at like Kijiji or Craigslist or whatever, but there's also online resources. And the first airsoft gun that I've bought, and actually probably almost all of the ones I've bought since then, were bought on the Airsoft Canada forums, which was sort of the go-to for us before Facebook was a thing, especially, etc.
Every rifle I have owned has been bought online except one. All on, secondhand like forums and stuff. The only one I have used that wasn't was my M16 back in the day. I did actually buy new. Like I said, I'm a little bit more inclined to throw out the money for brand new sidearms. They TM1s take wear and tear harder. So I don't necessarily want to play around as much there. But yeah, rifles, I basically don't buy firsthand if I can avoid it.
There's also, there's also Reddit. There's an airsoft marketplace on Reddit. There's an airsoft marketplace for Canada specifically on Reddit that is closely tied to the Airsoft Canada forum. So like if you have, for example, age verification status on Airsoft Canada, you can have it on the Reddit Airsoft Marketplace Canada. And again, like anytime you're buying online, it is buyer beware. Like you want to make sure that as much as possible, you're not dealing with scammers. So you want to look at people's post history, or you want to look at their trader rating if that's a thing on that site, etc. If you're buying local, obviously you want to go and inspect the goods before you purchase. But even when you're selling, like you want to make sure that you're not coming across as a scammer either, right? So there's certain rules of etiquette, right? Like typically, I'm not shipping you anything until you've paid me money, right?
Yep, 100%.
And that's unfortunately that's the reality. And if you're paying someone money before they send you something, especially at distance, if they're mailing something for you, then on the flip side, I will pay you the money, but I expect you to provide me tracking like ASAP, right? So there's a whole lot of rules of etiquette, which we're not really going to go too much into this. Like you understand, the listener likely understands some of these rules.
Yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory, right? Like try to send the gun within a day or two. Make sure it's packed well. Make sure it's insured. Make sure it's tracked.
Yeah, and provide the tracking number as soon as you can, as soon as you have it. The insurance bit that Pat was talking about is really important. I had an unfortunate situation that occurred to me many years ago when I had sold a replica M-Biter radio to someone, and it was in perfect working condition when I shipped it to him. And when he got it, it had been damaged in transit. Now, it wasn't sold for a whole lot of money. I think I might have sold it for like $80 or something like that. And he was coming to me saying, hey, well, what the hell, it doesn't work. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it worked fine. Like, I showed you a video. Here's video of me using it like the week prior at a game, etc. And it works fine. So it must have been broken in transit. And I'm like, well, I'm not responsible for that, unfortunately. And because it was less than $100, I never really thought to insure it. And so ultimately, we worked with Airsoft. We worked with Air Canada Post, I should say, and we were able to get the guy some money, and everything was cool. But it's sort of a crappy situation to deal with. Whereas if there had been insurance, it would have been an easy thing. So just something to consider when you're dealing with this kind of stuff. But like Pat was saying, there's a lot of onus on you if you're shipping to make sure that stuff is in good condition, that you're packaging it correctly, and that you take the insurance whenever is possible and ship it as quickly as possible.
That doesn't necessarily mean like overnight it unless someone's paying for that, to be clear. Just get it out of your house as quickly as possible.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. Like if they're willing to pay for overnight shipping, then fine, but you shouldn't take that burden on yourself, right? But when it comes to all that stuff, scamming is always something that can occur. Like it's just like any other purchase on the internet from someone privately. Just buyer beware. Just be smart about it. On a lot of these pages, I know on the Airsoft Marketplace and on Airsoft Canada, there are trader ratings, or there are wall of shames of people who are known scammers. So you always want to check that to make sure that you're not dealing with one of those people who are known scammers.
Yeah,
but there's only so much you can do, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of, like, as with most of this stuff, doing your due diligence, right? So if you are, using a password to secure something online, you want to use a password that's reasonably strong, not because it's impossible to break a password that's reasonably strong, but because the more inconvenient it is to do that, the more effective it is in causing people to just go look for someone easier to be a problem for.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So in terms of buying and selling airsoft stuff, if it starts to smell fishy, leave, walk. Don't waste your time, right? If someone is leaving you hanging, speaking from my own experience relatively recently, right? I waited 4 months to buy a gun from someone, and then they just ghosted me, right? That ultimately doesn't matter. Like, I didn't lose anything other than time, but it was very irritating. I should have really walked pretty early on anyway, simply because they were like, wait 4 months. Learn from my mistake, right? Likewise, if a deal looks too good to be true, probably don't be the sucker, right?
Yeah.
If someone's going, oh yeah, selling a fully upgraded M4 for $200, either they stole it or it's not fully upgraded. And there's no sensible outcome where you can work your way around that.
But this leads to another good point when you're talking about selling gear or buying gear. It's like, how do you know what a fair price is, right? How do you set a price and how do you negotiate with people? And I think the first step to all of that comes down to, okay, well, you need to understand what a new version of that item is worth, right? And in Airsoft, there's the additional layer of, does a new version of this item actually exist? Is it still possible to get this thing? So, for example, if someone is selling a brand new or relatively unused tornado impact grenade from Airsoft Innovations, right? Like a version 1, those aren't made anymore. Those are not in stock at almost any retailer. So if you're able to find one, well, it's not in too good to be true territory. It's certainly getting close to that. But like, that is certainly worth something, right? On the flip side, if they're offering to sell you an item that is extremely common, well, you need to think about, okay, well, let's go research a price. Like, what if I wanted to buy this new from somewhere, and you can, what is it that it goes for? Because obviously this is sensible, but there's no there's no table that exists that just shows you. You're going to have to do a little bit of research to find out, okay, well, I want to buy this G&G CM16 Raider. Like, what do they cost from, I don't know, Toronto Airsoft or Trigger Airsoft or whatever, or e-bike, right? And then you figure out, okay, well, is this a good deal or is it not a good deal? And on forums like Airsoft Canada or even on Reddit as well, you can also search the history to see what have similar items gone for in the past. And that's a really good baseline to see, like, is this sensible, right? Is this price sensible?
So to walk you through, a couple of examples of that, just because I've been looking lately, right? I literally decided I don't want a 416A5 Friday after a bunch of time spent wanting it, and then ultimately realizing that it actually is the exact same length as an Mark 18. I had a Mark 18. As much as I love the sort of 416 furniture, I hated the length of the Mark 18. My arms are just really long. Okay, we're just going to take that one off the shopping list. Cool. So the one I was looking at here was $400. MSRP is around $695, somewhere in there, or at least in Canada, right? So everywhere in Canada that I could purchase one is asking about $700. Probably, if I'm being honest, I was more willing to sit on that because, hey, that's a big savings, right? Part of the reason I was willing to wait on the guy. But I have an advantage here that a lot of people don't, right? If it arrived and it didn't work, or there was something wrong with it other than aesthetic, like cosmetic body damage, I would still have bought it because I can fix it. If that's not the case for you and someone is selling a gun way below value, be concerned, right? There are other interesting counterparts. So my primary is still the M27 IAR, Umrex VFC. Those don't exist. They stopped making them. Buying a new one is basically not possible. So that if I were to sell it, would command a fairly high price, simply because you can't buy a new one. I'm not really looking to sell it. That's sort of irrelevant, but I keep a vague eye on, what it's worth, largely out of curiosity, right? If you see a gun you own pop up on a website and you're like, oh, that's, someone selling that secondhand. Cool. I own one of those. You check out the price. Or at least I do. I know that right now in Canada, you can buy a TMPX4 for about $250 from a retailer, but you can also buy one secondhand. There are 4 or 5 of them available that are also $250 that are lightly used and come with 2 or 3 mags. So there's your benefit for buying the secondhand one, right? You're paying the same price, but you're getting $100 of magazines just added on for free. For an AEG, if it's out of box and it's been used and it's been gamed and it's working fine, I tend to think if it hasn't been upgraded or modified, you're looking at, a little bit less, but not a ton less than you'd pay for it. So if I had an A5 and it's going for $700, I'd probably want to get 550. I probably maybe post it for 6 and take 550 kind of thing. Because I'm getting most of it back. And fundamentally, yes, I'm a gun tech. Yes, I have a good reputation, but that reputation is fairly local. I think probably I've built up some reputation with, our listeners or with our channel on Discord by talking to people and providing useful advice. But, everyone who's used a gun I've upgraded really lives in at least Atlantic Canada. So if I'm selling a gun that's not upgraded, there's going to be some, just some dip in price because people don't know what I've done with it. Right.
Yeah.
And, I can say, oh yeah, I haven't done anything shitty with it. Here, look how it works. But, it's not new anymore. It's going to have a couple of dings because you bang it off of, walls and stuff, right? Just chip paint. So yeah, that's to me a reasonable price drop. I'm not super interested in buying and selling guns that are in the $200 range because shipping makes that inconvenient and not worth enough money to me, to be completely honest. But also as you've definitely figured out if you're a long-time listener, I'm picky, right? Mm-hmm. So there aren't a whole lot of like $200 airsoft guns that are physically robust enough to be what I want, or internally robust enough to withstand what I want to put in them.
You mentioned something earlier that I wanted to go back to as well.
Yeah,
because
totally.
You said like I might post it at like 600 and take 550. Negotiation is absolutely a part of these sort of secondhand sales.
And that can be weird because like you don't negotiate with like the pharmacist.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to talk about that just briefly because like obviously if someone has an asking price that they've set, firstly, you generally don't want to be disrespectful and like totally lowball them, right? So if someone's asking, 600 for an airsoft gun and you say, I'll give you 200, that's probably not going to work. And it's not going to feel good for that individual, right? It can be borderline insulting, right? It's the same thing when you're buying anything. Like if you're saying, hey, your thing is not worth the money you're asking for. And you might say, well, I'll offer 200 and they'll counter with like 400 and I'll be cool with that. But the thing is, if I'm asking 600 for something and you offer me 200, I'm probably not going to reply to you, or I'm going to tell you, no, thanks, I'm not interested. Right. So just consider that. But then the other aspect is
that's not a reasonable offer. And it's sort of a thing where you really need to be selling in good faith. So like if there's something wrong with your gun, put it in the post, right? Yeah. There are people like including myself, I have bought and will buy again, $500 gun not working, $200. Yeah, okay, I can fix it.
Yeah. And so when you're looking at that negotiation piece, I think you like Pat said, you want to do it in good faith. And so one of the things that I would typically do, and I think is totally fair, is if someone is saying, well, I'm selling this gun for 600 plus shipping, right? I would say, hey, would you do 600 shipped?
Yeah, right? And that's a really common one. Is sort of like, oh yeah, again, like that to me is like, yeah, that's about 550. Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
And like, I'm respecting the price that you've given. I'm trying to get myself a little bit of a deal. And if you're comfortable with that, then that's fine. And some people will say, no, my price is firm. It's 600 plus shipping. And then you need to, figure out for yourself if that's the price that you're willing to pay. But when it comes to negotiating, my advice for you in general, for you, the listener, is if you don't ask, the answer will always be no. Right? So if you are respectfully going to ask for a price that works better for you, for your bottom line, etc., then you absolutely should do that. Because if you don't, then they're never going to know that you would have been cool with a lower price. And on the flip side, as the seller, you need to figure out what your your rock bottom line is, because you also want to make a little bit of money ideally. And so if you say, in your mind, well, I'm posting for 650 or 600 and I will take 550, well, then that's got to be your bottom line. And you need to respect that for yourself as well. Because if you say 550 and that's your walk away point, and then someone offers you 500 and you take that, why did you set 550 in the first place if you were comfortable with 500, right? So you need to be fair to yourself. What works for your budget? How much do you need to make it worth it? So especially in the context of I'm selling this thing so that I can buy another thing? How much is the other thing? So an example, Pat is looking at getting, a new gun to HPA or 5 guns to HPA, whatever you're doing this week. I don't know. But like, how much money is that going to cost you? And how much capital do you have invested in other stuff? And you need to figure out, well, I'm willing to pay $300 to do this work that I'm doing. So that means I need to sell this for at least 500. That's your walkaway point. And doing that math helps you figure out how that negotiation is going to go. And you also need to be comfortable enough saying, no, I know what I have. I know what it's worth. Right. And if people are not willing to pay that, that's okay. Somebody else will be willing to pay for that. I would say, just as a final note on that, if someone has posted something that you think the price is completely outrageous, right? Leave it alone.
Yep.
You don't need to go out there and tell them it's like, bro, this is totally overpriced. Good luck selling, LOL. You're not helping anything, right? So if someone has something that's like totally overpriced, just move right on, right? Because that person will figure out really quickly, generally, whether or not their item is overpriced because nobody is buying it, right?
And, like, don't argue with people on the internet, right? Like,
yes, that's very true.
Like, argue with me all you want. Like, come say hi. But, like, don't argue with random people you don't know on the internet. It's a waste of your time. And also, in case you're on any of these threads and haven't actually read the rules, it's often against the rules to reply with, like, oh, that should be cheaper. Just let it ride, Yeah. Like, one of the things for me now versus when I, was playing and had much less money because I was less well employed like 8 years ago. So right now I'll take lower offers on guns than I might otherwise have, but one of the things we mentioned early on is that we wanted to sort of talk about how do we price guns. So pricing upgraded guns is obviously significantly different. You still want to go, in my opinion, have a look at what sort of comparables are out there, right? So again, I window shop on Airsoft buy and sells all the time for fun. It's probably a bad idea for me financially, but hey, my stupidity, your gain. So I usually have a pretty good idea of what the stuff I'm building is worth, right? And, it's usually, if you're going to buy an upgraded gun, going to cost you more than the cost of gun plus parts, because someone had to put those parts in there and it took that person time, and it is skilled labor. And if you don't believe me, hop on the Discord and ask Chaz. I'm sure he'll have my back. Right? Like, gun teching is a skill. It takes time to learn how to do it. It takes time to learn how to do it well. And then it takes time to actually apply those skills and knowledge to whatever you're working on. There isn't really a way around that. So if you're buying an upgraded gun, the price is going to spike. Probably above what the upgrade package in it is. If you're dealing with me right now, maybe a little less so because I have more desire to get the gun that I don't need out of my way than I have desire to get, maximum price for it. But that's still going to be, within some degree of reason, right? So if you're selling a gun that you've had a gun tech upgrade, let's say just the barrel grouping in, don't expect to get, $200 back from your $100 max hop up unit and your Promi barrel. That's not realistic. At the end of the day, you're going to pay more for putting those in and using them than most people are going to be willing to pay to get a gun with them in them. But, if you're selling, for argument's sake, what was a $400 gun and you've done that, then you should absolutely try to get $5 or $550 from it. Right? $657, yes, sure, you put money into it, but like, be reasonable about your returns. If you're looking at, fully done air seal, fully done everything, new MOSFET, yada, 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 then more. I've seen completely upgraded, like, to the nines, working beautifully, minty fresh guns go for as much as 11. But I've also seen a lot of guns posted at 11 sit for a really long while. And
I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second because you just said something that triggered something in me.
Yeah,
minty
totally.
fresh. If you're selling gear, wash it, please, for God's sakes. Right? Like,
Yes.
especially like your BDUs and stuff like that. Like, wash it. Good God.
There's an entirely different website for selling used clothing, and we are not on it.
Yeah, like there's no reason. Like, yeah, sure, you're not gonna wash your plate carrier or whatever, like in the washing machine, but you could certainly scrub it down, like make sure there's no dirt on it, etc. Anyways, go back to the AGs. But when you said minty fresh, I was like, oh my God, yes. No, nothing is better than opening up a package with clothing and it smells like fresh. It smells like clean. So do you people you're selling stuff a favor and just wash it. Anyway. Back to your regular scheduled AEG pricing talk.
No, that's a really useful point though. No one wants to get your gross sweaty BDU in the mail, especially after paying you money for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I personally, even when I've got stuff tacked up fairly well, I'm not usually into posting it in the like $1,000 plus price range. And I mean, that might honestly be just sort of me being conservative about pricing stuff when I'm trying to sell it online. But I also, as an example, right, the gun that I will be posting next week sometime, or maybe later this week, depends on the mail, it's going to have an upgraded, a rotary hop-up unit. It's going to have an air-hopped barrel. The barrel's Prometheus. It has had every single air seal part replaced. It has had a great shim job. It has upgraded gears. It has a $200 MOSFET in it. So yeah, I'm not asking, $400 for that gun. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be ridiculous. If I'm going to sell it locally, I might take less than the like 1,100 that the sort of going price online says. If I'm going to sell it online, I still might take less than the 1,100 because, like I said, that feels like a ludicrous amount of money. But like it is a $400 gun, and it does have $400 or $500 worth of parts into it, and a non-trivial amount of my time. So, I definitely am not selling it for $400. And I guarantee you that when I post it, especially when I post it to one of the local groups, someone's going to be like, "Oh, I'll give you $400 for it." I'm going to laugh at them. And that is what it is, right? There's nothing you can do about that. But I also will note, the amount you're going to charge is also probably going to be a thing where you want to think about, okay, where are you in the season? What's going on in terms of like how much airsoft is getting played? So if you sell a gun in the winter, you're going to lose an extra $100 on the price because virtually no one's playing.
In Canada.
And so people aren't in Canada. Yes, that's very fair. Virtually no one in Canada is playing airsoft in the winter. And so you're getting people who are less hyped, right? The guy who just played airsoft on Saturday afternoon is probably willing to pay you more than the guy who hasn't played in 3 months. And I mean, check that, definitely willing to. So, you got to be aware of that. It's easier to sell guns relatively early or in the middle of the season. You'll have a harder time getting more money in October. Just people are like, I won't get to play with this until next year, really. So yeah, there's that functionality, and that's worth keeping in mind. I see a really high valuation on HPA guns in Canada still. I actually think, to be honest, that some of that's fair because HPA kits are very expensive,
and finicky. Like they do require a fair amount. Like aside from maybe some of those drop-in kits that you were talking to me about a little while ago, like I know how much time like you and Steph and stuff, and you talking to Chaz as well, and Todd and some of the guys in Discord, like you put a lot of time to try and get those to work perfectly. And once you try and offload it, like you should be trying to get some of that time back as money, right?
Yeah. So like, if you're looking at a gun with a Kythera setup in it. So Kytheras are really nice. They are a little fidgety. Once you get them set up, they stay set up and they're grand. But like getting it set up is a 20-hour kind of job, unless you just get really lucky in terms of everything going together perfectly. That's worth money, right? My Kythera is working perfectly. Would you like to buy it? Is a very different question than, my drop-in kit. That being said, the drop-in kits are also absurdly expensive, right? 2 point some, right? And so again, this is sort of a like, well, it's very expensive. So yes, you're probably going to command a higher price for it. Likewise, you'll, if you go look at HPA stuff on YouTube or anywhere else, you'll find people don't recommend it for new players. because it's really expensive. One of the results is that, generally speaking, people also don't put them in lower end guns, right? Like, yes, I'm sure you can go find me a video of a guy who's put like an $800 HPA setup into a $200 G&G gun made of plastic, and I'm sure he's having a blast. But generally speaking, if you see someone on a secondary market selling a HPA gun, it's in something relatively pricey. In particular, with Polar Star stuff, you'll see them in VFC guns a lot because they test all of their stuff and design all of their stuff to fit into VFC guns. What does that mean? It means that if you're looking at, a VFC HK 416, that is a $700 new in-box gun. If it's got a drop-in kit, then someone has paid $1,600 for that airsoft gun.
Yeah.
And when they sell it, they know they're not going to get that back. But it's kind of understandable that they'd be like, I'd like to get 12.
Yeah.
You know?
So the final point that I think I'd like to make on all of this in terms of selling is how you actually market what you're trying to sell. Because it's not just a matter of posting it up as a thread and saying, hey, this is what I'm selling, here's what's inside. But a huge part of your ability to sell any piece of kit that you have, whether it's your gear or your guns or whatever, is having good photos of the item that you're trying to sell. And I really can't understate, or I can't overstate it, I should say. Like, you should take as much time as is necessary to make sure that you get multiple angles of the item that you're trying to sell in good lighting condition, against a neutral backdrop that doesn't, conflict with what you're trying to see, especially if there's a camo pattern. Like, use a white wall, use, a neutral floor or a countertop or something, and, keep your fingers and toes and whatever else out of the frame. Like, keep your cats out of the frame. Try and clean it up as much as possible. And the nicer it looks, the more professional it looks.
Send the cat pictures to Pat, keep them out of your marketing.
Like, the nicer it looks, the more appealing it will be to someone who's looking at selling it. Because I mean, when I see a picture that's like really high quality, I'm like, wow, that's someone who really cares about the gun that they have, right? Or the piece of gear that they have, whatever it is. It's like, that looks really cool, and that would look just as cool on my shelf or in my hands or on my person, right? So taking the time to just set up some nice shots. You don't have to be a professional photographer. It's really not that hard. You can look at some reference pictures online. You can set up the same kind of stuff. Like, your camera in your phone nowadays is very, very good and very capable of taking stuff that doesn't make your airsoft gun look like a potato, right? You don't need to have like all kinds of fancy backdrops and all this kind of stuff. Like, just today, Pat was asking me if I could take pictures of a couple of the spare stocks that I have, and I took them in the studio that we shoot our videos in, just with my iPhone, with just regular lighting against sort of the set dressing that we have, and I think those pictures look great, and I would post those pictures to sell those items.
Agreed.
Because they look fine.
And that's the practicum of it, is like, like, I'm asking Phil to take professional photos of the guns I'm going to be selling, largely because, especially the one that's fully upgraded, is, I do hope to command, the higher end of, like $700, $800, $900 for it. Like, that's a reasonable price for it, and hopefully I'll be able to sell it at that. But having really good looking pictures is going to make it a lot easier, because people will go, oh, that looks cool. And it's in, a fairly stylish package, right? The gun body and the rail on it are pretty cool. So that will assist probably in people being interested in it. Certainly, detailed shots. I do want to say, because I think it's very useful, when you're talking about like, oh, what should I put in the post? You should put exactly what's in it in the post.
Yeah.
You should tell the buyer every part that's in it, because that's sensible. So if it's stock, just stock is fine. If you've paid to have parts of it upgraded, list them, be specific, right?
Yeah.
So, because if you tell me you have a 6.03 Promi barrel, but you don't tell me the length, I'm going to ask you the length, right? Yeah. So, be clear. Don't go into huge amounts of detail. If you've had a tech work on it, it can be worth name dropping them if there's someone who like has a wider reputation. Probably not me. Yes, some of the guys who've been like teching on Airsoft Canada for 15 years.
Yeah. And as well, like if you decide to dress up the gun in some way by putting accessories like, like a foregrip or an optic, whatever, and you are not prepared to sell those, you should specifically list in the post that these things are not included, or if you're willing to sell them, you can say they're not included, but will sell or whatever. But if you're not prepared to sell them at all, then you need to be very clear, because people will ask you about that too, like, oh, can I have the optic or whatever. And in some cases, you may consider not putting them on there if you don't want to field those questions, right? If you're absolutely not prepared to sell it, then maybe you don't post it. But you need to at least be very clear that if something in the picture is not included, that you list it clearly that this is not included in the sale. Only, the gun, and not pictured a magazine or not pictured a battery or what have you. But everything you're selling should be in there. And if it's not for sale, it should be very clear.
Yep. I have a long-standing policy of, if you offered me the right amount, you'd probably be able to buy the gun I'm using at a game. But that doesn't necessarily mean that amount is a fair price.
Well, that's true too.
There's stuff I'm more attached to or less. But like when we take those photos, I've got a spare red dot that I'm probably willing to get rid of. So yeah, I'll put it in the pictures. And that'll look sort of, that'll look nice. Great. I also, have a really nice scope that I use all the time. I'm not putting that in pictures. If I didn't have a spare red dot, I also wouldn't be putting the red dot I don't want to sell in. Basically, if you want to buy the gun that I'm currently using at a game, you're paying extra for the inconvenience. Well, if I'm selling online, I'm not putting anything in there that I don't want to sell, because I don't want to inconvenience myself.
Yeah, exactly right.
And like I said, I might put in the optic. I probably won't be willing to sell the optic separate from the gun, but sure, I'll put that optic in and I'll go, yeah, I'll sell it for whatever added onto the gun I think is fair. There you go. It's all about sort of thinking beforehand. Okay, like, am I putting anything in this photo that I don't need? Am I putting anything in this sales post that I don't need? Have I put anything in here that I don't actually want to let go?
Yeah. So guys, that's sort of it for our conversation on selling airsoft gear and like the residual market. As a bit of a recap, it's totally cool, totally fair, totally safe to buy and sell airsoft gear online and in person, obviously. There's a lot of wiggle room for you to recuperate some of the money you've invested into the hobby, and pass those savings on to other players who, just like us, will be using the gear for many, many years to come. And take care to be accurate, to be honest about what you're selling, and get your fair value out of it. Hopefully you found sort of this conversation helpful. The tips that we had to share, our experiences helpful. Hopefully it also helps you. There is a buy and sell section on our Discord, so feel free to join. We have people from all around the world who are actively engaged in conversations and stuff, and you might find a cool piece of kit that maybe is more accessible to someone than for you. Local border laws apply, and we do not police any of that. But it's certainly worth having some cool conversations with people about kit all around the world. And
I mean, I guess in fairness, maybe I'll post the stuff that I'm looking to sell there as well, in case anyone in Canada wants it. And I'm not doing that as a marketing sort of thing. Just like I hadn't thought about the fact that we have a buy and sell on our Discord for a while. Yeah.
So guys, thanks so much for listening. Thanks for tuning in. That's all we got for you this week. We will talk to you next week.
Thanks, guys. Have a great week.
Take care.